Tokyo Game Show is just around the corner as it's happening September 26th through 29th. While TGS isn't the biggest event on the gaming calendar, for most it's a B-card event, but if you're into Japanese games, which we all know I am, the majority of the games I do enjoy are Japanese in some way, shape, or form. Well, for us, this is the time of year we're eating good. So I thought since I'm usually right about things that get announced or shown off during TGS, why not make a prediction video so that way if I'm right, I can be absolutely insufferable in a separate video. And hey, if I'm wrong, you numpties that hate me can come at me in the comments section. So, let's get into it. As of September 6th, it was announced there was going to be an Xbox broadcast at TGS. We all know I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the Xbox brand, because beyond Killer Instinct, Crash, and Spyro, there really isn't much that I give a flying fuck about. Admittedly, I am interested in the new Indiana Jones game, but since we're here to talk about Japanese stuff and not games developed from Western studios, well, let's get some predictions out of the way. So my first prediction for the Xbox side of things is that we'll get a Final Fantasy XVI port announced. A lot of people feel like FF16 failed because of it being a PlayStation 5 exclusive. I covered why that isn't the case in a separate video on why third-party exclusivity still matters, so go and check that video out when you're done here. However, we know from what Square Enix has said in the past that they're going to port their things to other consoles going forward and onto PC, so I'd say it's a safe bet that we get both Final Fantasy XVI and 7 Rebirth announced for the Xbox Series S and X. Now keep in mind, this one is totally on me. It's not information from any of my sources, so if this one's wrong, you can blast me all you'd like. I also think it's likely that a few JRPGs that were exclusive to the Xbox 360 will get ports to newer systems, so things like Infinite Undiscovery, Magna Carta 2, Blue Dragon, and Lost Odyssey, as all of these titles have some varying degree of desirability from JRPG fans who either didn't play them when they were on the 360 because they didn't have one at the time, or because they played these titles in the past and want to play them on modern hardware. Unlike the Final Fantasy XVI and 7 Rebirth predictions I made earlier, I feel like these have less of a chance of happening and aren't super realistic. But with people getting more and more worried over game preservation, a few of these companies who had hands in developing games stranded on nearly 20-year-old hardware at this point in time may want to port them over to modern systems if they feel like they can make a quick buck. Also keep in mind, generally speaking, ports of this nature are inexpensive to produce and usually make back their money and more, which can lead to new entries in that series. I've told my story about how I got into fighting games numerous times on this channel, and my next prediction is related to that franchise. A friend of mine finally convinced me to give Dead or Alive a shot in my early 20s because I had a low opinion on it previously, because it was just perceived as the big booba game. I eventually tried it and realized there was so much more to it than just a nice pair of... But either way, a Dead or Alive reboot was quietly announced with a Ninja Gaiden one a few years back, which I covered on this channel, but then was loudly unannounced. The thing is, I get the feeling that is still in the works, and Koei Tecmo are still hard at work on it. My various sources have told me this is indeed the case, and they're hard at work on that. However, they're going to want to bring the public's attention back to the franchise before the reboot happens, and what better way to do so than bring in a Dead or Alive collection. If they were to do that, their best bet would to be a collection of the first 4 games, which thanks to my sources, I do believe will happen. Would it be better if they included a Dead or Alive 5 Last Round remaster in with it? Of course it would. But you have to consider that game is still available via the PS4, so it makes very little sense for them to pack that in with the first 4 games, which are impossible to play on modern hardware beyond the Xbox Series X via backwards compatibility. So the first 4 games just make sense when you think about it. If this remastered collection is announced though, it's going to need to have a few features come as standard, ones that will put the Capcom fighting collections to shame. It needs rollback netcode, but that's a minimum expectation for fighting games in this day and age. Hell, Tekken 8 managed it, so these DOA titles can as well. Don't believe me? Then just Google Dead or Alive games, Fightcade, and rollback netcode, and you'll see that it's possible to implement. If modders in their basements can do so, then a super big corporation like Koei Tecmo can as well. I also wouldn't be too surprised if we see our first look at the Ninja Gaiden Reboot too. We'll definitely see something related to Atelier Yumiya as well, since that was recently announced and Koei Tecmo will want to capitalize when even more people's eyes will be on it. Anyways, moving on. This one I've been sitting on for a while now. We all know in recent times Bandai Namco have made Digimon a bit of a priority. Some of that has been great pieces of media, like the Adventure Tri movies Last Evolution Kizuna and Digimon Adventure 02 The Beginning. Then you had potentially awesome projects like Ghost Game and Survive, which failed to live up to expectations. Other good Digimon games include the Cyber Sleuth titles. Since their release, we haven't had a Digimon story game come out, so that has been since 2018 for the West and 2017 for Japan, which is a long-ass time when you consider those games are kind of a pillar of the Digimon franchise. The World games are also a part of the pillars, but those games are far more niche than the story ones. Now, how are they more niche? Well, when you consider they're based off the Digimon V-Pets, which are monster raising simulators in a handheld form factor, yeah, that's pretty niche. But given the resurgence of Digimon's popularity in the West, a call for an official TCG client, and the fact we haven't had a new game in a good long while, TGS would actually be an ideal time for Bandai Namco to start releasing new games in the series. I think it has a good chance of happening, too, given Bandai Namco knows it'll sell relatively well, with a very low investment because Digimon fans are starved for new games in general. So overall, I'd say this prediction is a likely one. My fourth prediction is a long shot one, so do bear that in mind. I think given Astro is doing super well for itself right now, and since Sony will be at TGS with some Astro stuff, I wouldn't be all that surprised if Team Asobi quietly announces they have a new project in the works. Astro took them about 3 years of active development to put out. Now that they have a lot of assets for that franchise thanks to the tech demo Astro's Playroom and now Astro I wouldn't be surprised if we see Astro sooner than people think. In the weeks leading up to its release, Astro was at or near the top of the most wished for games on the PlayStation Network, and at the time of recording, is the top selling game on Amazon's USA site. If that doesn't tell you something, then my good sir, madam, or non-binary pal, you need your head checked, because the math is mathin', and it says Astrobot is a clear winner. Just think of the hype Sony could drive for a future Astro game if it was announced at TGS. But that's not to say Team Asobi won't have something else in the cards, as they very well might. It's a real possibility we see them working on something else that might be a bit more ambitious. We'll just have to wait and see, but it seems odd to me they'd have Team Asobi showing up, plus PlayStation reps as well, if we weren't getting something from either brand. I don't have any other predictions regarding Sony. I just think it's noteworthy they're showing up as well. Maybe this will be the long-rumored PlayStation State of Play. If so, I imagine it'll mostly be Japanese-focused and will probably feature a few new third-party games announced, but only a handful of first and second-party stuff, if any. For my fifth prediction, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Nihon Falcom showed up and showed off something really cool. They did so last year with Trails Through Daybreak for the West. We know Daybreak 2 is just months away for us Western fans, so my predictions are this. We might see Kai no Kiseki get announced for the West with a middle to late 2025 release date. After Daybreak 2, we're all caught up to Japan's releases minus Kai no Kiseki, which releases in just a few weeks for Japan. Kondo has said numerous times that Falcom wants to reduce the wait times for fans in the West, since that's where they've seen the highest growth, sales-wise. They also seem to have a pretty good partnership with NIS America right now, which is important as their parent company is in trouble. But it is noteworthy that NISA is profitable. The last time this happened, the American branch more or less gained more autonomy from its parent company, and I imagine this might wind up happening again, and they may entirely break away from Nippon Ichi Software. Usually NISA does show up at this event to announce or showcase stuff, so I don't see that trend changing. I also imagine Falcom themselves will want to use this as an opportunity to show off more footage for the Trails in the Sky remake, which has the fandom in an absolute fervor. so it just makes sense for them to show up and show off the game more, and potentially we hear them reveal what other platforms it's on, because logic and math dictates they just aren't going to release it as a Switch exclusive. For one, it flies in the face of what we've heard Kondo say in the past. He wants to make the Trails games as accessible as possible for people in the West. Sure, there's a ton of Switch consoles in North America and Europe, but the vast majority of Falcom's player base either owns a PC or PlayStations. The Sky remake is also going to release worldwide next year as well, even if Falcom self-publish, which means more than likely they're going to want to port it to as many consoles as possible. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, stop being stupid, Falcom are only 50-ish people strong. Well, that is true. Look at the hardware they're most familiar with in terms of development. That would be the PS4 and 5. Those both operate on x86 architecture, which is the same stuff powering most PCs. The Switch, however, has its own architecture, which is apparently an absolute ball ache to program for. Falcom has only very recently started to work with the Switch, and that's pretty damn telling, as it's the second highest selling console of all time. Another thing that is noteworthy is how much better some of the screenshots that have been coming out look compared to the footage from the Nintendo Direct. Either that footage is running Switch 2 hardware, which I very much doubt, as Nintendo is really selective about who they give dev kits to early on, or it's running on either the PS5 or a PC. Either is a very real possibility, especially considering how familiar they are with PS5 hardware at this point in time. We also have the Tokyo Xanadu sequel flapping in the wind, which is rumored to be out next year too, so we might hear something about that. I'm fairly confident we'll hear at least one or two things from Falcom regarding future Western releases, though for Sky's remake, I think the likeliest outcome is we hear about additional platforms and a release date during the shareholders meeting in December, as they'll likely reveal a few things they have coming down the pipeline then, which is how the eagle-eyed, like myself, first spotted the Trails in the Sky remake 2 years ago. If you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh!, then you'll have heard of the Early Days collection announced for Switch and PC earlier this year. I'm fairly excited for it, as I enjoyed a lot of the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. I even speculated on which titles we'd see in a separate video. A card for that will be on screen now. At present, we have a placeholder date of December 31st of next year. Now, it's probable we hear about this game in the near future, as Amazon and Best Buy put up pre-orders last month, and on September 2nd, Konami announced an X account focused on the Early Days collection and other retro-themed products. Again, logic tells us there's something in the cards here, if you'll pardon the pun. I get the feeling whoever's editing this video cringed pretty hard at my dad joke there. Anyways, TGS is a great choice to announce this collection, as Japanese gamers will want to know about it, and us Western weebs do too. Subscribe if you're a weeb who loves Falcom and Yu-Gi-Oh!, because I very much might start covering Yu-Gi-Oh! Stuff if enough people express an interest. If it does get a release date, I expect it's going to be between April and August of next year, as that's usually when releases are on the lighter side. But when do you think we'll see the Early Days collection? Let me know in the comments. Since last year, it has been rumored Sega is working on a new Virtua Fighter project. This is partially because of the font Sega used just before the Game Awards with their invitation card sent out to some content creators. Virtua Fighter is the only game that uses said font, so it was kind of suspicious when no Virtua Fighter was shown off during that little vignette. We know Sega have a so-called super game in the works. From the rumblings surrounding it, Virtua Fighter could fit the bill. Also, if you know anything about the history of the FGC, Virtua Fighter is pretty much the reason we have 3D fighters at all. Also, Harada-san has said he wants Virtua Fighter to do well, because that helps Tekken and other fighting games do well, as Virtua Fighter always leads innovation. Also, if you look at FGC discourse, the content creators want a new game even more than casual members of the fighting game community want a new Virtua Fighter, so it just makes sense to give the people what they want. Chances are, this will feature the Dragon Engine again, which Sega used for Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown. The engine looks great, and actually works well for a fighting game, which brings me on to my 8th prediction. It was announced a while ago that RGG Studio would be at Tokyo Game Show. So what does this mean? Well, they helped build the VF5 remake, they weren't the head studio on said project, so they're gonna bring something else. At this point, they have a strong output of Yakuza and Judgment titles, and I expect this is going to continue. We'll probably hear something about a new Yakuza spin-off and probably get a new Judgment game announced. The first two Judgment titles sold pretty well, and they're beloved by those who have played them. Also, the Yakuza, now known worldwide as the Like a Dragon series, is RGG's top seller. We're also due for a weird and wonderful title, akin to Dead Souls. Since we've covered the Sega umbrella, it makes sense to talk about Atlus next. They're likely to show up in some capacity, given Metaphor will just be a couple of weeks away, and they have also hinted about various Persona things in the works, so it just makes sense for them to show up and announce some cool shit. So what do I imagine they'll show off? They'll 100% have one final showcase for Metaphor, as this is the last gasp for the marketing push before release. They're going to need to drive as much hype as possible. Maybe check out why you need to support Metaphor when you're finished with this video. I'm also fairly certain we'll see a new Persona 5 spin-off announced that will release sometime next year. If I was to hazard a bet, I'm putting my money on it being Persona 5 Arena, since the FGC wants a new Arena game. Hell, even Persona fans do. So again, the math is saying release the goddamn fighting game before Persona 6 becomes the primary cash cow for Atlus for the next fucking decade. I say that partially in jest, because I doubt we'll ever see an end to the Persona 5 spin-offs and sequels, because people love the Phantom Thieves more than they've loved any other Persona team, and Atlus would be stupid to not capitalize on this. Admittedly, Persona 5 Tactica didn't do all that great sales-wise, but you can't put that down to the game being bad. It's more because tactical RPGs are just a hyper-niche affair, and even the ones that do well for themselves, like Fire Emblem, well, they just aren't going to move eye-watering numbers. Given their style, I doubt we'll ever see tactical RPGs in the mainstream. I also think there's an outside chance we see a teaser trailer for Persona 6, because that game is also rumored to come out next year, and Atlus will want to drive up hype for it as much as they possibly can. Though I think it'd make more sense for them to release the reveal trailer during a PlayStation State of Play or during the Game Awards, as that's when they'll have the most eyes on them. They'd also have a lot of eyes on them during a Nintendo Direct or during an Xbox event, but considering JRPG fans just don't buy Xboxes, and Nintendo fanboys pretty much stick to first party, that pretty much means a lot of their fanbase own PlayStations or PCs. And I'd say the sales probably prove that, but that's not the only Persona announcement I think we might potentially see. I think there's a very real chance we see the Persona 4 remake unveiled, given that one is the likeliest to get remade next. Also, unlike Persona 6, it doesn't matter so much when and where Atlus reveal it, because the base game is old. It has its fans, and I'm definitely one of them. But a remake is less likely to drive fans into as big a frenzy as a new entry. Then again, Persona fans really want remakes of the first two games, so maybe those get prioritized. Albeit, if they do get priority, they won't announce it so early, as I've heard from my sources that Persona 4's remake entered development around the same time as P3 Reload did. So if Persona 6 isn't releasing next year, we might see a Persona 5 spin-off and Persona 4's remake instead, which I think is probably the best option, even though next year is looking like a very weak year in terms of gaming, but that's mostly because most companies want to stay the fuck out of Grand Theft Auto 6's way. There's also a rumor we'll see remasters for the first Persona game plus the Persona 2 duology, and I think this is rather likely to happen at some point. Also, it wouldn't surprise me, despite being a long shot, if Atlus unveiled a remaster for the Shin Megami 4 Tensei duology of games, as SMT fans have been demanding this for ages. There's also the fact those along with the Persona Q games are trapped in 3DS hell. God, I'd love if they announced remasters for the Persona Q games, as I never got to play those, and I'm not about to pay some scalpers crazy money for the privilege. The Devil Summoner games have also recently been rumored to be getting the remastered treatment, so those are just some of my predictions for TGS. What do you think is likely to happen? Comment below and like the video if you've made it this far in. Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell and Dani Boy. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can do so by hitting the join button or the link in the description. By doing so, you'll gain perks such as early access to videos, exclusive ones that wouldn't be favored by the YouTube algorithm, and shoutouts at the end of every video. Now check out either my video where I discuss parts I got right for last year's TGS, or watch why you need to support Metaphor. Pre-order the game after watching that video, so we prove to the games industry taking chances on new ideas matters. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.